All right, it looks like our folks have started to slow down, so I'm going to invite Kate Markert, our director, to introduce herself and get us started this evening.
Thank you, Erin. Good evening. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. Thank you for inviting us into your home tonight. Please make yourself comfortable. We can't see or hear you, so feel free to enjoy your favorite food and drink without fear of judgment. I know that many of you are already familiar with Hillwood, the 25-acre estate and extraordinary collection of decorative arts founded by Marjorie Post. While the coronavirus forced us to close the museum, we invite members and essential workers to visit our beautiful gardens now with advanced registration. This summer, we will present a rich array of online lectures, family tours, and floral design programs. Details can be found on our website, hillwoodmuseum.org. These programs are all free for Hillwood members, and we are very grateful for your continued support. I invite anyone who is not yet a member to join today. As I mentioned earlier, your cameras and microphones are not active, but we do still want to hear from you. Please submit your questions through the chat feature. You can see on the screen how to submit questions from a computer and from mobile devices. Our moderator will make sure we get to the questions at the end, so send them just as they cross your mind. It is now my pleasure to turn you over to Hillwood's Chief Curator, Dr. Wilfried Zeisler, who will be speaking about the fate of Russian jewelry collections after the revolution.
Good evening, everyone. So it's a great pleasure to be with you tonight for this lecture on this very broad topic, but I will focus, as you will see, on specific stories. For those of you who are familiar with our institution and with our founder, Marjorie Post, you know that she was a great collector of jewelry, contemporary 20th century jewelry, but also historic jewelry. And we highlighted her passion for jewelry in an exhibition in 2017, which was called Spectacular. And I use that as an introduction because 2017 was actually also the 100th years anniversary of the Russian Revolution. And 1917 was also very important because it was the year when Marjorie Post, when living in New York, was recognized as a serious art collector, winning at auction in New York a big painting by Rubens. And while she was actually collecting in New York in the late 1910s, early 1920s, she came across some first Russian objects that actually had crossed the Atlantic, being sold by the Soviet government after the big changes in Russia, but also brought to the West by some Russian emigres that she also met in the 20s. And among those treasures she acquired, which started her interest for Russian history, you have these two earrings made of diamonds, which are believed to have belonged to Queen Marie Antoinette and once belonged to the Yusupov family. And I will tell you more about those subjects in a few minutes, which were at one point owned by Marjorie Post. But let's go back to the 20s, when Marjorie Post, as I said, began collecting seriously art in New York. She also gathered some documentation showing her interest for the Russian history and also the fate of some of the treasures which were sold after the Russian Revolution. As a proof, we have this on this slide, this article that came from one of her scrapbooks kept in their archives in the University of Michigan, where there is an article dedicated, as you can see, on gems which came from the Tsarina, and especially talking about an emerald set. And this article from the New York Times of 1922 describes actually how these jewels started to arrive on the Western art market. And it's an interview of famous French jeweler Pierre Cartier, which in this newspaper said, quote, "The Russian Revolution and the disastrous situation in Austria had brought into the market a large number of the world's most beautiful and renowned jewels, which formerly could only be admired from afar on the occasion of great ceremonies such as royal weddings. Many of these have already found their way to America, and others will follow." End of quote. And then the article describes, you know, this necklace and this set of emerald and diamonds. By reading this description, we know actually that the article was talking about a piece that once belonged to Grand Duchess Vladimir. Here you have two photos of her wearing actually the set described in this newspaper, this necklace made of diamond and emerald that she's wearing here on this fancy dress in 1883. And again, here set on her headdress in 1903 for an amazing ball organized at the Winter Palace. And I will tell you more about Grand Duchess Vladimir and collection of jewelry soon. But as you can see through this example, these jewels, which belong to their imperial family, were saved during the revolution, came across the Atlantic, and finally got back to Cartier, who actually reset them in the most fashionable way. And on the left, you have a photo of the historic necklace, which included several very large emeralds, as you can see, one being about 107 carats large, and which were reset in a more fashionable way. And you can see on the right, Barbara Hutton wearing those emeralds as a tiara, which could also be worn as a necklace. And as an anecdote, Barbara Hutton was actually Marjorie Post's niece by marriage, and she also shared with Marjorie Post a passion for jewelry. And more recently, one of the large emeralds was actually reappeared in 2019 on the art market, and you can see that small photo on the slides, which was recut later on to be reset on that jewelry. So as an introduction, this is just an example which shows you the interest that Marjorie Post had for these jewels in the 1920s, and also the kind of stories I will share with you with more details. I will just, and they also show you like the lavish lifestyle that the Russian court had before the Russian Revolution. As there are many examples I could present and develop in today's presentation, I decided to focus on the more important, collection of jewelry in Russia before the revolution and what happened to them after the revolution. So basically today my plan is very simple. I will start to give you a sort of like broad presentation on what this collection looked like and what kind of collection you could find in Russia right before the Russian Revolution, and then tell you what happened to all of those treasures. And as you can imagine, we will start with the state jewels, which of course were part of the belonging of the imperial family. They were very important because they were a statement of power, as jewelry has always been. And as you will see through this presentation, we are not only talking about status, the status as these jewels represented, but also talking about how those collections were actually wonderful cash reserve, money cash reserves, because they will help many of these people going through difficult times with the Russian Revolution, because they will sell them and live through exile with the value of these treasures. So the state jewels were actually mostly based on the collection of historic jewelry, which represented the power of the ruler of Russia. They included actually antique crowns that are still kept at the Kremlin in Moscow, and that were managed until the Russian Revolution by the largest department of the Ministry of the Court, which was the cabinet of His Imperial Majesty, who managed actually these treasures and paid for them and maintained them, recorded them, listed them, and so on, and also sort of like check them in and out during, depending on the use they had. And this organization of these state jewels began with actually the reign of Peter the Great in the early 18th century, when he was reforming the empire. And historically, they moved with the new capital from Moscow to St. Petersburg, when St. Petersburg was founded in 1703. And they were actually kept at the Winter Palace until 1970s in St. Petersburg. And they were used on a regular basis to represent the power of the ruler of Russia, and also sent to Moscow for the coronation, where they were used for each sovereign when they will go through this sacred ceremony, which was actually the way to empower each ruler, and how they got, wearing these jewels, their power from God. So they had a very strong and powerful statement, these jewels, and very important. And they were considered as state jewels, so owned by the state and inherited from a ruler one after another. So here you have an example of the three main pieces from the state jewels, which were actually the coronation pieces or regalia, which were, as I said, kept in St. Petersburg until 1917 and used for specific ceremonies, especially the coronation. And here in our collection, you have this beautiful portrait of Catherine the Great, who actually, as you may know, took over the power in 1761 after a coup against her husband, Peter III. And she was crowned in 1762. And since she made a coup to take the power, the coronation was a very important ceremony. And having her represented very often in her official portraiture, wearing all the symbol of her power, was a really strong statement to justify her and legitimize her power in Russia. And here she's actually wearing her coronation dress and some of the crown jewels that she wore for the coronation in 1762 in Moscow. Some of them actually she commissioned, and she was actually known for her great interest for jewelry, especially diamonds. And here on this slide, you can see some of these details of, some of the jewels she's wearing. This large brooch I will show you in a minute, the St. Andrew necklace, which was the highest order in Russia, St. Andrew, and on the cushion next to her, the crown, the globe, and she's holding, of course, the scepter. Here are details of these pieces, which were part of the crown jewel, the regalia. So these were actually, for most of them, commissioned for the coronation of Catherine the Great in 1762. Beside the brooch on the bottom left, you have here, which dates to the mid-18th century, which is still kept in Moscow, which is made of diamonds, which is from the mid-18th century. But she commissioned the crown, which she used for her coronation. And that crown has over almost 5,000 diamonds, almost 3,000 carats total, 75 pearls, and a huge spinel, this translucent red stone at the top, which is of almost 400 carats. And this crown she commissioned from Jérémie Posier in 1762, who was a French-Swiss jeweler working at court during the reign of Catherine the Great. She also commissioned the globe, you can see it here, which is made of gold, diamond, has also a very large sapphire of 200 carats, which she commissioned from Eckhart, who was another court jeweler working in Russia at that time. And finally, the scepter, who was actually a later commission from the 1770s, when she added to the crown jewel collection this amazing diamond. You can see the size of it. It's considered one of the largest diamonds in the world, which his weight is about 189.62 carats, which, according to the tradition, was presented to Catherine the Great by one of her lovers, Count Gregory Orloff, but it's proven now that actually she acquired it. But it's named after him, the Orloff diamond, and it's still set on the imperial scepter you can see here. And after the reign of Catherine the Great, each ruler, if sovereign of Russia, will actually use those jewels for their coronation until the last emperor of Russia was crowned in 1896. So that's about the, of course, the crown jewels and the regalia, so the symbol of the power. But the state jewels also had other pieces of jewelry which were added to the collection or reset to be more fashionable, to be worn by members of the imperial family during special ceremonies, using some historic stone or stones to be reset, or being, created more fashionable for court, for use at the court. And these state jewels so were enriched one reign after another, and were, of course, lent on a regular basis for special events. So not only the crown jewels, but also other pieces of jewelry. And I forgot that slide, but here is another detail of the crown, which is again worn by Catherine the Great on another portrait here. And it's also a portrait which was commissioned after her coronation in 1762. And you can see how she's wearing the crown. And to go back to what I was saying about, the fact that those jewels will be used on a regular basis, lent to members of the imperial family. Here is an example of the last empress. So we are jumping in, the time, and we are like now in the late 19th century, early 20th century, during the reign of Nikolai II and Empress Alexandra. And here she is on this portrait you can see on the right, dated around 1906 from our collection, which was done after a photo you have on the left, which was taken during an official event, which was a very important one in the history of Russia, which was the opening of the first Duma after the first Russian Revolution, when actually a first parliament was created and elected, and the inauguration of the first Duma was a very important event, which took place in the Winter Palace, where the crown jewels were shown next to Emperor Nikolai II, and where all the members of the imperial family, including the empress, were wearing precious jewelry from the state jewels. And she's actually wearing a quite recent, from the period, piece of jewelry, this diadem you can see, which is made of diamonds and pearls, which was most likely a work by Berlin, who was a jeweler from Swedish origin, who actually was a very serious competitor to Fabergé and delivered a lot of jewelry to the court. And this piece was added to the state jewels in the 19th century and is worn here by Empress Alexandra, with also the St. Andrew necklace she's wearing here on her bust, as you can see. And here I have an image of the ceremony in the Winter Palace, and here is the emperor, here is the Empress Alexandra, and that's a Dowager Empress, and they are entering the St. George room next to the throne, which was in this room. And next to the throne, you had actually the state jewels, which were presenting the crown, the globe, and the scepter as a symbol of the power. But if we look closely to the photo I just showed you, unfortunately, so that's the photo I want to show you a detail from. If you look closely to what the Empress is holding right here, she's holding a very interesting piece, which is known through a drawing you can see on the left, which is a fan, which is actually quite well documented. It's a beautiful French work with enamel work, diamonds, and has the symbol of Russia at the top. You can see it here and here, the double-headed eagle, which was made of diamonds. And this piece was actually a piece from famous French jeweler René Lalique, and which was commissioned most likely in 1894 as a gift or present to the Empress at the time of her engagement and wedding, which happened that year. And she's wearing it, and she's wearing it often. We don't know who actually paid for that fan. Most likely it was the state, because it's recorded within the state jewel, but sometimes these jewels were, mixed together. But my point about this fan here, which is actually a present she received in 1894, tells you how progressively the state jewel collection was enriched and increase in number of pieces, but also make a perfect transition to the second theme I would like to develop regarding these jewels belonging to or used and belonging to the imperial family are actually the personal jewels, which are were completely managed differently. So personal jewels were actually, at the difference of the state jewels, were managed differently, were managed by the Empress or the Emperor household, and also they were privately owned and were supposed to be paid privately, but at that time it was difficult to distinguish, I will say, what belonged to the state and what belonged to the emperor and the empress, because technically the state belonged to the emperor and the empress, but they were like treated separately. And here I just wanted to focus on one piece among the different, and they are usually less documented than the state jewels. I wanted to focus on one piece especially, and Empress Alexandra on this miniature from 1898 is actually wearing it, and we have a detail of it. So this piece was very important in the life of Alexandra. She really liked this small crown because it was really a piece which was connected to her love story with Emperor Nicholas II. And you can see from the Boucheron archives, a famous French jeweler from 1894, the photo of the small crown on the top, which is made of diamonds and pearls. And you can see different photos during a lifetime of Empress Alexandra, showing her wearing the crown, including holding her, here her son, the Tsarevich, and here in this famous photo showing the imperial family, and she's wearing actually this French crown by Boucheron on this photo taken in 1914, in 1914, sorry. So before the revolution. So this crown we know was very important to her, not only because of the value, but because of the symbol of that crown, because it was a personal gift from Nikolai to Alexandra in the summer of 1894. As you may know, the couple was engaged and married very quickly in the fall of 1894. But prior to that, they met in England, where Alexandra was staying at her grandmother, the Queen of England. And while they were meeting there, Nikolai and Alexandra, Nikolai actually recorded in his diaries while there that he received actually the visit of several representatives of different jewelers who presented them with different pieces of jewelry. And then he said, without details, unfortunately, that it shows a few pieces. And we know from the Boucheron archives that he actually chose this crown to be presented to his future wife. So that's also why this piece was so important for Alexandra and belonged to her personal jewels. Speaking of personal jewels, of course, the imperial couple was not the only, members of the imperial family who were collecting and buying jewelry, because you had to have jewelry to showcase your status during, entertainment and parties before the revolution. And one person I would like to focus on today is, and I started with her actually with this example of her emeralds as an introduction to this presentation tonight, is Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, also known as Grand Duchess Vladimir. So Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna is actually a very interesting cultural figure in Russia. She was born German in a very small principality in the northeast of Germany, the Mecklenburg-Schwerin, and she belonged to a family who had very long relationship with Russia and who were also known for her culture and their taste for art. And when she married Grand Duke Vladimir in 1874, she entered the imperial family, and Grand Duke Vladimir was an uncle to Nikolai II, and at that time brother of Alexander III. And very quickly, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna began a very influential and powerful woman at court, and she was considered one of the three most important women at court in the early 20th century, so the third woman of the empire after the Dowager Empress Maria Fedorovna, the mother of Nikolai II, and after the Empress Alexandra. So she was the third one. And she loved to travel. She spent almost every year, she spent some time in France, in Paris, in south of France, and she loved jewelry, she loved fashion. And here, while traveling to France, she got her portrait made by a very fashionable portraitist at that time, François Flamand, who did this portrait in 1898, and she's wearing the most fashionable dress of the time, which is most likely a piece by Worth, the famous fashion designer from Paris. And as you can see, she's not necessarily wearing a lot of jewelry, but let's look at the detail of this painting, and you can see she has two very large pearls she's wearing as earrings. And what I love about those, that I believe those are very well documented, that are a good example of the test for pearls in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And actually this refers to a story which is told through the archives from the French jeweler Boucheron, where in 1893, Grand Duke Vladimir, so Maria Pavlovna's husband, brought a large pearl from his collection, from the imperial collection, and asked Boucheron to find a second pearl to create actually a perfect pair of earrings with two pearls. And this was done by Boucheron, and here she's wearing a pair of earrings with two very large pearls that she may have received as a gift for the New Year's Eve of 1893, 1894. She wore them very often, but what's important about this story about pearls, they were very fashionable, very rare, very priceless, because they were all natural at that time. And you can imagine how it must have been difficult for the jeweler to find exactly the matching size and color of the pearl to create the perfect, actually, pair of earrings. And there is some correspondence between Boucheron and Grand Duke Vladimir, because Vladimir was not very happy because both pearls were not exactly the same size, but the jeweler stated that it wouldn't be an issue because no one will notice since you are wearing, these pearls still as earrings. But still, you can see they were pretty large, and they were very, as I said, priced, very valuable. And here she is again on the left wearing the same pair of pearls that once were commissioned, one of them by Boucheron. But just to give you, commissioned from Boucheron, but just to give you a sense of the value of these pearls, so as I explained, one pearl was brought by Vladimir to Boucheron. He commissioned Boucheron to find the second one, to create a pair, and then to set them as a pair of earrings. And actually, he paid for that work the same amount that for that tiara you can see here, this diamond tiara, which is another example of the commission that Grand Duchess Vladimir made from France. And this is a tiara which commissioned from another jeweler named Chaumet, which still exists today, such as Boucheron. I like to show again, this photo I started with, which is this extravagant costume she wore in 1903 for a Russian-style ball, which was organized at the Winter Palace. And as I mentioned earlier on, she's wearing her emerald here in their big brooch here. And in the headdress, you can actually distinguish here this tiara she commissioned in 1899 with diamonds, and it's called a waterfall diamond. It's supposed to look like a waterfall, but not made of water, made of diamonds. And she's wearing it here on this very rare photo from 1940. Of course, she was also a client of Cartier. And here is another example of the commission she made from Cartier. Cartier became very fashionable in the early 20th century. He became actually official supplier to the Russian court starting in 1908. And Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna commissioned Cartier with many pieces of jewelry. And here you have an example of a sapphire set that she commissioned starting in 1902, bringing some of her historic jewels to the jewelers to have them reset in a more fashionable way. And sometimes the jeweler adding new stones to the set. And so that commission started in the early 20th century, and then she will add pieces on a regular basis. So the diadem, the tiara you can see here actually was commissioned around 1909, and the central sapphire is over 130 carats. And then the following year, she commissioned this stomacher made of sapphire and diamonds as well. Here's a drawing from the archives, and here she's wearing it, and the large sapphire, which was 162 carats, was provided by Cartier to match the rest of the set. She's wearing here superbly with the tiara, the necklace, and the stomacher in 1913 of this portrait, which is now in her private collection. But all these commissions are pretty, official and really related to jewelry that you will wear for special events and special ceremonies. But Grand Duke Vladimir and his wife are also recorded in some of these archives for really fashionable and pieces of jewelry, which reflects the latest fashion. And here are just to give you an idea, some examples of these historic photos of two pieces we know were commissioned by Grand Duke Vladimir from Boucheron in the 1880s. And on the left, it's an amazing gold scarf made of gold and diamonds and pearls, and that you wear like a scarf, but it's just gold. And on the right, very fashionable, like this question mark shaped necklace that you will wear this hidden behind your blouse, around your neck. But that piece, very naturalistic and rich with diamonds, will appear outside your bust. So that's how they were worn. And this is two examples of these very fashionable pieces that were also commissioned by these clients in the late 19th century, early 20th century. So of course, there was a lot of competition between the members of the imperial family, but also with other family, with aristocrats especially, which also had wonderful collection of jewels before the Russian Revolution. And tonight, I will only focus on one specific example because they are very famous, and they also have a fascinating story, and they amassed an amazing collection of jewelry. And this family is actually the Yusupov family. And in one century, they actually amassed an amazing collection of jewels, which were almost comparable to royal collections. So the Yusupovs, as I mentioned, were very wealthy, and the collection of jewels from the family began in the early 19th century, but in the late 19th century, there are several inventories of their belongings and their jewels. But in the late 19th century, no less than 6 diadems, 15 necklaces and sets, 11 pair of earrings, 49 brooches of different kinds, 23 bracelets, medallions, big diamonds, and so on, are recorded in their collection of jewels. And as I said, this collection, which was very large and extensive, began in the early 19th century with the Princess Tatiana Yusupov. She's here on the left, portrayed by Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun. And she actually brought some of her jewels into the family that she got from her uncle, Potemkin. And Potemkin was a favorite of Catherine the Great and got a lot of jewels from her as well. And so she brought that prestige and that collection already with her into the Yusupov family when she married Nikolai Borisovich Yusupov. And she had a great passion for jewelry. And I will say she knew how to find, opportunities to grow her collection through revolutions. And she bought pieces that once belonged to the King and Queen of France, which were on the market after the French Revolution, and also pieces that once belonged to members of the Bonaparte family, which lost their power after the fall of the French Empire in the early 19th century. And here you have example of the two famous diamonds and pieces that she bought and she brought into the Yusupov family. One is actually this famous pair of pendants, which are known as the Marie Antoinette earrings. We don't know it's once they were owned by Marie Antoinette, but for sure they belong to the Yusupov and are made of these two very large pear-shaped diamonds, one of about 14 carats and one about over 20 carats, and set, of course, with diamonds here. And she also brought into the family, but for the family, this diamond, which is now in a private collection, over 40 carats diamond, the Polar Star, which became very quickly a family heirloom. And this collection of jewelry was passed from Princess Tatiana on the left to her daughter-in-law on the right, which is Princess Zinaida Ivanovna Yusupova, the first Zinaida of the family. I will try to make it to be clear, but you will see the Yusupovs, they all have the same name, so it's kind of like difficult. But Zinaida Ivanovna is a very interesting figure. She loved also jewelry. She had a very independent life, and she was actually her husband, so Prince Boris Nikolaevich Yusupov, son of Tatiana here on the left, died very early on. And so she moved to France. She spent a lot of time in France, and she fell in love with a very young officer at the court of Napoleon III who had no title, was not a noble, not an aristocrat, was 20 years younger than she was. Whatever, she married him and built a mansion where they had great time and spent time in Paris in the mid-19th century to enjoy the life in Paris during the Second Empire. And she died actually in 1893, and then her collection passed on the next generation. So while she was living in Paris, actually her daughter-in-law, Princess Tatiana, so the wife of her son, who is here in the center, Nikolai Borisovich the Younger. So Princess Tatiana here is featured on this portrait by Winterhalter from 1858. You have two versions of that portrait, one with tiara, one without tiara. So showing, her wealth and her jewels. The pearls were a large part of their collection of the Yusupovs, and some of them actually came from Princess Tatiana and from Potemkin himself. And also, this tiara here made of pearls and diamonds was also a piece that came from Princess Tatiana, who bought it from the Murat family. And Murat had married into the Bonaparte family, and their jewels came on the market during the first half of the 19th century, and that's how they entered the Yusupov collection. And here she is with some details of what she's wearing. Here is a drawing of the diadem I was just talking about. And she's holding here a very beautiful fan that she most likely got for her wedding in 1856, which was made in France and which is still at the State Hermitage here. And sometimes for special occasions, so it's basically the same system as for the imperial family, her mother-in-law will lend her some of the family heirloom she could wear for special ceremonies. And here you can see her featured on this portrait of 1875 by a French painter, Fouquet. And she's actually wearing some of the family heirlooms on this French diadem here. She has this Polar Star, the diamond I just presented, which belonged to her mother-in-law. And here, the earrings, the Marie Antoinette earrings that she also belonged to her mother-in-law, but she's wearing them here on this portrait, most likely for a ceremony in the 1870s. And when both passed, so Tatiana and Zinaida Ivanovna, those jewels passed into the last generation of the Yusupov. And here on the left, you can see Princess Zinaida Yusupova and her son, Prince Felix. Felix was actually very famous during the First World War, mostly for participating into the conspiracy against Rasputin in 1916. And he was the one who inherited all these jewels. And jewels which were used and reset for his wedding in 1914 with Princess Irina. You see her on the left here. Irina was a niece of the last emperor of Russia, Nikolai II. And here you can see her wearing one of the pieces reset in the fashion of the early 20th century in 1914 for her wedding. And this jewelry she received for that wedding were so important, so significant that they were photographed and reproduced in the local town and country. And you can see here are all the gifts that she received from family members and friends of the family. And here you have example of all the family jewels, how they were reset in a fashionable way by the French jeweler Chaumet in 1914. And here you have drawings from the archives showing how, you know, they were planned in advance for the wedding. And here is actually from Cartier, the diadem that Prince Felix offered his future wife for the wedding in 1914. In 1914, this wedding happened in February 1914. It's right before the First World War, and we know what will happen at the end of the First World War, the revolution. And now we will explore what happened to all of these treasures and jewels. The revolution, so let's start with what we started first with the state jewels. Here you have like a table covered with all the state jewels, how they were inventorized right after the revolution. With the revolution in 1917 and with the threat of the Germans moving to Petrograd, to St. Petersburg, so it was decided that all the jewels would be sent to Moscow. So they were all sent to Moscow, then inventorized and recorded, and finally even published in a very lavish publication with beautiful photos reproducing all of the jewels owned by the state, and they were even published in different languages. And we have a copy of this publication in our library. Here you have the French version, but there is a German one, an English one, and it was most likely to be shown to different dealers or representatives, most likely to offer them some of them for sale. And that happened in the 1920s. And here you have a photo of some of the workers trying sacrilege, I will say, even the symbol of the, power, the crown, the scepter, and the globe worn here by this worker after the revolution. So a great symbol of, the power has changed of hands. This is a new regime, and this is the end of the old regime. And so the negotiation were started and finally set with businessman Norman Weiss, who actually dealt a lot with the Russian Soviet government and arranged many sales with objects he bought directly from the Soviet government and then sold them as groupings in the West. And he bought actually a selection of the state jewels that he then offered for sale at auction at Christie's in 1927. And here you have a page of the catalog, which included 124 lots of a selection of the state jewels. And as you can see, a brooch, a crown, a tiara, and tiara, and even the fan I showed you today. We don't know exactly where all these objects ended up after that sale. They were all sold. Some of them have survived. Some of them are actually at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Here are there, like these ornaments, diamonds ornament on the left, which were commissioned by Catherine the Great. They were ornaments for jackets and vestments. For jackets, sorry, and costumes. And on the right, you have this now mounted as a brooch, but which originally was most likely a hair ornament made of diamonds and rubies from the mid-18th century. And those pieces were sold in 1927 and now at the V&A. But the largest piece of the state jewels, which is now outside of Russia because the other pieces were kept and now can be admired at the Kremlin, is actually the nuptial crown, which is today at Hillwood, which was part of the sale of 1927, made of over 1,500 diamonds, some of them coming from the state jewels from commission that had been done by Catherine the Great in the 18th century. And this nuptial crown was part of a very large set that each woman was wearing when they got married. And we have some iconography about the use of this nuptial crown, showing how important it was. So here you have a painting featuring the marriage of Empress Alexandra in 1894 to the future Emperor Nikolai II, right before he became emperor. And she's wearing the set, which was not only the nuptial crown, but also a diadem, earrings, a necklace, and a brooch. And here you have a photo of one of the last Grand Duchess who wore the whole set, who was Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, who was the daughter of an uncle of Nikolai II. She got married in 1908 to the Prince of Sweden, and here she's wearing the set, and the nuptial crown is at Hillwood. The tiara, the earrings, the brooch were kept by the new regime and are now the Kremlin, but the necklace has disappeared, was part of the pieces which were sold. So that's what happened to the state jewels. So some of them were kept, the most significant ones, other ones were selected to be sold, and some of them we can trace, other ones are lost because most likely were disassembled. Regarding the personal jewels I mentioned to you, and I will just focus on that example here, as far as we know, most of these personal jewels that belong to Empress Alexandra and her family were taken by the family in exile in Siberia. And as we all know, when they were executed, the daughters had sewn some of these jewels into their corsets, and some of them were found after their deaths and disappeared since then, and a few have survived, such as this earring made of a pearl and diamonds, which is now at the Foundation of Russian History in the US. So that also happened regarding most of the personal belongings of the last Empress of Russia. Other members of the imperial family had more luck because not only they survived the revolution and were not executed, but could also leave the country with their jewelry. And that was a case of Grand Duchess Vladimir. And here is another of her treasures which survived. And so she was the last member of the imperial family to leave Russia. She died right after, actually, in France in 1920. But she was able to save a large part of her jewels, who were taken from her palace by a friend of hers, a diplomat, who sent them abroad in 1917. And then she found them back when she immigrated to France. And then she gave them to her children, who actually lived by selling them over decades. And here she's shown wearing this wonderful tiara, which is another work by Boleyn, the court jewelers, made of diamonds and pearls. This one was actually sold to Queen Mary of England, and guess who owns it now and enjoys wearing it? Her Majesty the Queen of England. And as you can see, you can wear them with or without pearls, or also with emeralds. Others were not as lucky, especially those who actually put their jewelry into bank safe. Those safes were nationalized, and all of the jewels that they contained, as shown by this illustration from 1917, were confiscated and taken by the new regime, as you can see here, so were lost. And that happened, so part of the jewels of the next person I will show you, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, the one I just showed you wearing our nuptial crown, which is at Hillwood. The jewels which belonged to her father, who got them from Empress Maria Alexandrovna and Emperor Alexander II, were actually in a safe, and we know that they were taken by the new regime. But she managed to save some of her jewels, such as this tiara she received from her father for her wedding in 1908, which was made by Cartier, made of sapphire and diamonds. And that piece most likely survived in different ways. We know through her memoirs that you had to be very innovative to protect your jewels before leaving Russia, and to put them in different places to not to be stolen. And she shared in her memoirs how they were very good at creating candles made of melted wax, in which they will put broken pieces of jewels to save them and take them with them. And same way, she saved her tiara that she received from her aunt for her wedding. And that was made of emerald that came from, again, Emperor Alexander II and Empress Maria, and that she later sold to the Queen of Romania. And now it's owned by Van Cleef & Arpels, but the emeralds have been replaced by past stones since the emeralds were reset and resold. And let's finish with the Yusupovs I was focusing on today. So as a reminder, so Felix Yusupov, the last Prince Yusupov, was able to get back to his palace at the time of the revolution to take some objects with him, some family heirlooms, 2 Rembrandts. So I don't know how he traveled with all of that, but he was also able to manage to hide a large part of his family jewelry, but also part of the jewelry of his mother-in-law. And they were hidden in the wall of his palace in Moscow. But unfortunately, in 1925, this treasure was found during the restoration of the palace. And here is a photo of what happened to all of these treasures. So you can recognize the diadem I showed you, the one he presented to his wife in 1914, one of the stomacher she received in 1914, how they are like deassembled, broken up in different pieces so that they will be separated into different stones. This metal will be melted down. So that's what also happened to many of these jewels during the Russian Revolution. Regarding the pieces he saved and took with him, he sold them abroad, often through dealers, but also through the jeweler Cartier. And Marjorie Post, who we know was a great client of Cartier, bought several pieces during the 1920s directly from Cartier, and including several pieces which once belonged to the Yusupov. The pair of earrings here, which once we believe potentially belonged to Marie Antoinette, some miniatures with diamond frames that belong to the Yusupov, this famous box that belonged to the Yusupov, she bought through Cartier, and are pieces that she saved. And these pair of earrings that she later gave to the Smithsonian, where you can still admire them, she had them reset in 1959 to match this brooch that she ordered from Harry Winston. And behind that brooch, which has a very large diamond, as you can see as well, there are 2 attachments in which you can suspend actually these 2 earrings. So you could wear them as earrings or wear them as, you know, a brooch or an ornament for a diamond necklace, as you can see it on this painting from 1961. And I like the fact that I started this lecture with, you know, a clipping of Marjorie Post potentially dreaming in the 1920s of this emerald that once belonged to the Imperial family. And here she is in 1961 wearing the earrings that belonged to Marie Antoinette. She believed that at that time belonged to the Yusupov, attached to a piece she commissioned for Harry Winston. Basically, she has around her neck a summary of 300 years of history, telling the story of the French Revolution, the story of the Russian Revolution, the story of 20th century America she represents, and basically a summary of what Hillwood is. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Wilfried. That was fabulous. I hope that all of our participants today enjoyed your talk as much as I did. My name is Erin Lurie, and I manage Hillwood's adult public programs. I'm going to be moderating the Q&A today. Please go ahead and type and submit your questions into the Q&A module. That's that little question mark bubble that should appear at either the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you're using. You may need to tap the screen or move a mouse to make it pop up. We've got a couple of great questions in, but please don't be shy. Send us all your questions. We do want to hear from you. Wilfried, our first question came in from Eric Esau very early on in the program, talking about the extraordinary diadem that I believe you said was a gift from Nikolai to Alexandra in 1884. You mentioned later that there is that one pearl earring still in the collection of the U.S. Museum, but Eric was wondering if there was any more information about the fate of that piece.
So I was just showing the crown itself, we don't know what happened to it. So we believe that since it was for sure a piece that was privately owned by the Empress. It's most likely a piece that she took with her and disappeared with her and the family in Siberia. So we have no clue at all of what happened to it. And a few only pieces from the jewels that they took with them have survived, and includes this earring, which is not part of that crown, but it's only a rare example of the pieces that were found after their execution in Siberia. So the crown, we believe, was part of these pieces that disappeared then, but we have no trace of it.
Fabulous. Our next question came in from Donna, and she also wrote before you. I think you might have gotten to some elements of this, but she wondered what pieces that you talked about tonight were in Marjorie Post's collection.
So the pieces which were in her collection actually are the two pieces, the Marie Antoinette earrings, believed to have been Marie Antoinette's earrings, for sure the Yusupov earrings that you can see right now, and of course a nuptial crown that I mentioned, and which is one of our most significant pieces in our Russian collection.
Thank you. Gail West submitted a question. Did the Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna survive the Russian Revolution? If so, where did she go and live, and for how long?
So which one? The last one or the first one? Which Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna? Because there are two I mentioned today. So I can mention both. That will clarify. So Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, or Grand Duchess Vladimir, the one I started with, which owned the emerald and different tiaras, including the one that is now owned by the Queen of England. She escaped Russia in 1920. As I mentioned, she was the last member of the imperial family to leave Russia alive. And she went to France, where she had her, she was used to go to France, and she moved to Contrexeville in the east of France, and she died there actually almost a few months after having left Russia. Regarding the second Maria Pavlovna, so the younger, so the daughter of Grand Duke Paul, and she was also the sister of Grand Duke Dmitry, who was also famous because he was a friend of Felix Yusupov. So she also survived, left Russia, and she lived partly first in France, in Paris, where she actually opened a fashion embroidery workshop called Kitmir. And then she traveled to the US. She actually met Marjorie Post in 1931. She was invited for tea at the New York apartment of Marjorie Post in 1931, which was organized to support a charitable event. And she did a presentation there. And then she spent time in the US. But I have to say, I don't remember where she died and where she lived, but she survived, yes.
Gail also wondered if you could mention what happens to the last Princess Yusupov.
So the last Princess Yusupov, so Zenaida Nikolaevna, so she left Russia as well with her husband, Prince Felix, and her son, Prince Felix, same name, so always complicated in Russia. And so they lived partly in Italy, and then they lived in Paris, where they had actually a house there. And she died, I don't remember which year, but she died in Paris. And then Felix also, and he had, a daughter, and she had a daughter, and the family still exists today, and they live between France and Greece.
Thank you. Randy and Laura de Leon asked if there was Russian Alexandrite in the Russian collections, or if it was not in fashion at this time.
Very good question. And since I am not necessarily a gemologist and I didn't look necessarily into like the fashion of different kind of stones, I will say I don't know. So I prefer to say that than saying something which is wrong. So sorry about that.
I appreciate that. I feel like the most important lesson I learned in grad school is to be able to say, that's a really great question.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Exactly.
There's always more to learn, which is a lovely dovetail to our final question this evening. Do you have any books that you can recommend about Russian jewelry for Nancy?
There are actually several. I will say that the most recent one, and I will only mention the one in English because, you know, I could mention my book on French jewels that, you know, were commissioned by the court, but it's in French. But yeah, I will definitely recommend the book by Stefano Papi. I think it's a great, you know, summary of all, you know, the collection that were, you know, part of the lavish style of the Russian court. So the book, I think it's called like The Romanov Jewels or something like that by Stefano Papi, definitely.
Excellent. And I misspoke. We do have a couple other questions that came in, and
Okay,
I'd love to throw one more at you.
sure.
Is there any recent information about another tiara of Alexandra with round and pendulous pearls? By the late 1920s, it was in the Ducal Marlborough collection, but decades later, it came into the possession of Imelda Marcos. And it sounds like there are rumors about it being from the bank vault, being in a bank vault in the Philippines or possibly dismantled.
All right, so I think I know what it is about. I'm not sure because I should have, but if I'm not wrong, I think it's about potentially the sapphire and diamond tiara from Grand Duchess Vladimir. I think that's the one we are talking about, but there are stories about what happened to her and who owned it, and the names that were mentioned in the question are those names, which I remember. So I think that, but it's still the same story. We don't know exactly.
Fantastic. Well, Wilfried, thank you again for a great presentation, and thank you to everyone who joined us this evening and for your great questions. When the webinar ends, you will be prompted to answer a short survey, and I really appreciate all of your feedback. This is our first virtual lecture, and we rely on your feedback to help make our programs better and better, so please share your feedback. And I hope that you'll join us at some of our upcoming programs. The next time we gather for a lecture is on Wednesday, July 8th, where you'll see Wilfried as a familiar face, along with curator Megan Martinelli, as they walk us through a day in Paris with Marjorie Post. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.